Hey everyone, it's Josiah, and this is the first episode of June, on the 20th. However, episodes aren't coming out late in the month for the usual reasons, like laziness or poor scheduling. It's because I've been preparing and recording the episodes for July. See, back in September, when I sort of relaunched this show, I did a month devoted to evangelicalism. I did an interview with Tad DeLay, the psychoanalyst, as well as Josh Borman from the Worst of All Possible Worlds about his upbringing in evangelicalism. I also talked to some close friends of mine, Josh Christensen and Leo Dickinson, on the Patreon feed. Josh Christensen had jokingly called it Christian Girl Fall, if you remember. If you started listening after September, I do recommend all of those episodes. They're well worth your time. But after recording all of those and spending the month really thinking about growing up in evangelicalism, I got pretty bummed out and decided to move away from the subject matter a bit. I didn't want Fruitless to just be an ex-evangelical podcast. I liked that theme just being one of the threads we come back to on the show. And I did plan to come back to it on the show. So while mentally recovering a bit from that month, I started planning another evangelicalism month later on, and I decided that I'd aim for July. So if we did Christian Girl Fall last September, then this July we're doing Christian Rock Summer. That's right. We'll be talking Christian music, and my buddy Josh Christensen from the Music Exchange episodes will be joining me as co-host for that month. We'll be looking specifically at fringe cases, metalcore bands, indie artists, people that fell a bit more into the Christians in a band rather than Christian band kind of realm. I'm excited to share those episodes with you all. But that's July. It's still June. Here's how the rest of the month is going to go. I'm going to be doing my damnedest to get the promised 2 free episodes and 2 Patreon episodes out for this month. I will be doing my best to get those out in the next week and a half. If I end up missing one, I'm sincerely sorry, but you will get a bunch of stuff in July. A bunch of stuff is lined up and it will be coming out. Today, we will be dipping our toes into the subject of evangelicalism a little bit in preparation for Christian Rock Summer. And my guest is perfect for helping us move the show in that direction. Jason Kirk is a writer and podcaster who talks about sports and religion. He's a senior editor at The Athletic. He hosts 2 podcasts, the Shutdown Fullcast, which is about college football, and the Vacation Bible School podcast, where him and his wife Emily talk about the Bible from a kind of post-evangelical lens. Most importantly for today's episode, though, Jason Kirk is the author of Hell is a World Without You, a coming-of-age novel about growing up as an evangelical during the Bush era. It's an incredibly moving book, and I highly recommend reading it. We do our best not to spoil too much in the episode, but I do still highly recommend you check out the book after you're done listening. I also want to give a specific shout out to James, at cigarette_liker on Twitter, for introducing me to the book. You'll get to hear a bit more from James in July. In today's episode, we discuss Jason's novel and what inspired it, as well as the world of Christian alternative music and the importance of universalism and questioning the existence of hell for many former evangelicals. It's a really great episode, and I hope you enjoy it. But before we dive in, I do need to say that this show is on Patreon. For a mere $3 a month, you get access to 2 additional bonus episodes, including an ongoing series I mentioned a bit ago called The Music Exchange, where Josh Christensen and I exchange an album that's personally meaningful to each of us, and then try to compare and contrast them. They're always really fun episodes. All right, with that out of the way, let's get on with the interview. You are listening to Fruitless, a podcast about history, politics, art, philosophy, faith, and the internet, hosted by me, Josiah Sutton. This is episode 36, Hell is a World Without You, featuring Jason Kirk, where we talk about his novel and growing up in evangelicalism. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fruitless. I am joined today by Jason Kirk. Hello, Jason.
Hey, what's up? How are we doing today? I'm
pretty good.
Very happy to be here. And this podcast that I accidentally scheduled on my work calendar and therefore showed up 2 hours late to. But we're here now. We're here.
We're doing it. It's all good. Man, well, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself if somebody doesn't know who you are, what your thing is?
So, publicly and professionally, I'm a editor for the New York Times Company for The Athletic. I'm a sports editor there. I have a podcast with some friends called the Shutdown Fullcast that is somehow one of the biggest college football podcasts. It's very silly and off topic. And I have a podcast with my wife, Emily, called Vacation Bible School. It is about going back through the Bible many years after no longer being church kids and learning what's actually in there. Mm-hmm. And along that line, I'm also the author of Hell is a World Without You, a novel about a group of 9/11 era high schoolers scratching and clawing their way out of a pretty hardcore evangelical upbringing.
Hell yeah. Yeah, so I got introduced to the book by a friend of mine, James. He's a cigarette liker on Twitter, and he was he was just insisting I read the book and sending me pictures of pages from the book, insisting I really should read it. So I'm glad I finally did. It's a fantastic coming of age novel about growing up evangelical in the 2000s, and I'm a bit younger than you, so like my coming of age would have been in the 2010s, but that didn't really like keep any of this from being not relevant. You know what I mean? Like it all tracked perfectly with the same experience I'd had. So really
maybe slightly different music, but also kind of not, because it's like we had Under Oath when they were nothing. Y'all had Under Oath when they were huge. That's kind of the only difference.
The only difference would be just, I mean, I recognize Under Oath, but was taken aback for a second with describing them as Christian black metal. Because I'm like, oh, they're like an emo band, right?
Right. Yeah.
So real quick, I guess the best question to start off with is why did you write the book? What inspired it? What kind of made that happen?
There was a day when my wife and I, when we really, we've been married forever. So, we're church kids. So we got married pretty young. But somehow had never talked about religion for like the entirety of our 9,000-year marriage. And then, around the time of like COVID, when it's just like, I was sitting around the house, not a lot to do, but stare at each other. For whatever reason, started talking about religion at that time. And started unearthing some stuff, and I started to realize that, like, okay, the things I say, at parties where it's like, hey, here, let me tell you this wacky story from my childhood, and people kind of stare at me. I started to realize, like, oh, there's a word for that. That word's trauma. Oh, I get it now, right? Which is like, it happened a lot. Like all throughout the 2010s was kind of my bit. Like I just say some weird religion stuff and like dazzle everyone with it. And then I started to realize, like, maybe there's actually something here.
Maybe some damage was done.
I started to think back on a lot of conversations with other people who grew up, like me, and I'm assuming many of your listeners, that I started to realize like how common a lot of this bizarre stuff was. The hell houses and the weird church camps and like the weird rules about what you can do with your body and think about other people's bodies and the amount of time you have to remember very specific books and listen to only certain kinds. It's just, on and on and on. And how specific some of the like incredibly niche, bizarre stuff was. And I don't know, I think I sort of had that on one hand. And then on the other, I'm like, there's like so very little fiction about this stuff. Like there's tons of evangelical fiction, but it's all evangelical propaganda, right?
Yeah. Like, it's for the Christian bookstores or whatever.
Yeah. Because like I started to think about like the only time I've ever seen my childhood depicted in a novel was in Left Behind YA. That's not good. That's not ideal. That's not what you want, right? Because like in Left Behind YA, what we're seeing is it's like, look at these 15-year-old pieces of garbage who were left behind by Jesus. And I'm like, yeah, there I am. Right? Because they suck so bad at church that they deserve the apocalypse. And I'm like, yeah, that's my guy.
That must be me. Yep.
Yeah. And it's like, there's lots of great fiction about, leaving religion, about Catholic trauma, about, about whatever. And there's lots of great like memoirs about like, and lots of great nonfiction about various perspectives on evangelicalism. But like the novel that's like, yeah, we were in the Zondervan, but we are not of it. Right?
Yeah.
The one that's like, nah, we can speak your lingo front to back and upside down. We would demolish you at a Bible sword drill, but we don't vote like you anymore,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like a novel about evangelicalism that is not propaganda for it. It felt so rare, which is weird, right? Like, and since writing it, people have told me like, oh, people have said that they never thought that they would ever see themselves in fiction.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if that was the original goal, but it was definitely something that emerged as like a hope. Because, at first it was just like, I got a lot of weird stories. Let me throw some stuff together and like sort of combine them with weird stories from other people and whatever. And then it started to emerge that like, oh, wow, I'm kind of like repairing my whole brain here. And halfway through, it's like, wow, this is like the darkest trauma I've ever, or darkest therapy I've ever gone through, right? If those words make sense, they kind of make sense together. And then, now it's like, I'm not going to say I did the book that, everyone was waiting for or whatever, but like, I took a stab at it and this, I'm proud of where it fits into, if 100 other books also emerge to fill that, I'm proud that I have one of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you mentioned also on some other podcast appearances I had checked out that there was a specific anecdote that of course gets used in the book as kind of a backstory for one of the characters. Do you want to say a little bit about that and how that kind of influenced the writing process? Yeah.
I never know when I'm like repeating it too much, but yeah, it was.
It's fine. It's a good anecdote. So
yeah, it always. Hey, like I said, it's when I tried it out on podcasts and parties for years before realizing, look, I'm saying some really messed up stuff here. So like, it was like 6th or 7th grade. It was the 90s. It was before 9/11. It was before Columbine. It was during the like, DC Talk era of it's great to be martyred. Like they did a whole book about how martyrdom is awesome. Yeah. It was Wednesday night this was at a mega church, but that part really kind of doesn't matter. It was Southern Baptist. That part kind of doesn't matter because I've heard this kind of stuff has happened in lots of places. So we're doing our thing, singing and whatever, about to play Foursquare or whatever, and a small group of men, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 men, burst into the room, waving rifles around, yelling about "Deny Christ or we will shoot you all." They grab one kid, drag him out into the hall, sound of gunfire, sound of a body hitting the floor, and eventually it's revealed this was a skit. We're doing theater, right? Hope you learned your lesson, because next time it'll be real when the Democrats take power, and like, see, it kills. It's a great story.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good story. I mean, it's so incredibly fucked up. It's
yeah, and like for years, I would just tell like, and there was this thing for years where I told my wife, I told Emily, and like she's like shocked and horrified. I said it on a podcast with like a couple friends who aren't religious at all, and they were shocked and horrified. I told it to a couple of my friends, decades later. I was like, hey, remember that time when the da happened? And they were like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Literally a month or 2 ago, I got back in touch with someone who was there that night, and he was like, oh yeah, I was on the other side of the room. I know 2 of the guys who were in that group. We can find them on Instagram right now. We look them up and like, yeah, they're still up to the same stuff. And like, it keeps getting confirmed that like, no, that was totally real. Everyone remembers it, and we all shrugged it off because everything else was crazy already. Like we were told every single moment was the end of the world, and the rapture was right around the corner, and hell was breathing down our necks, and we'd better save everyone and save our schools and the planet and change the government and fix abortion and all this stuff. And it's like, well, who cares if somebody's waving a gun? That's the least of my problems. Also, I have a crush on 9 people at once because I'm in 6th grade. Like I got bigger problems than this freaking gun. Like, and yeah, it was the very first thing I started writing, like the very first page, was about a teenage boy and a teenage girl confronting their youth pastor who was being violent. Which, like, that is what the book builds toward. It doesn't feel like a spoiler to say that, because it feels like, to me, it feels like it's telegraphed all throughout that's what's coming, and like multiple characters just tell you that's what's coming. And like, that was always sort of the thing that we were building toward. And I just kept finding like all this stuff I had to explain. Like at first it was like 20 pages. And then it was like, how in the world do I explain why it would be such a big deal for these kids to challenge this guy? How do I explain why this guy would feel so passionately that, everyone must agree with him, that the fate of the world is on the line if somebody disagrees with him? How do I explain, and then it's like, purity culture. And eventually it's like, oh shit, I need 300 pages. I'm taking on writing a novel. Dang. But yeah, and it that moment morphed into, within the book, it morphed into, it went from the protagonist to the antagonist. Ultimately, it's his origin story. And I tried to use it in a sympathetic way to say like, hey, what if you were the kid who got grabbed and taken out of the room? What if you weren't told it was a skit? What if you were the kid who was 17 years old, who's like maybe a church casual? It's the protagonist's older brother who's like, he's got a football scholarship lined up. He's doing great for a high schooler. And then he has this crisis of faith because he's dragged out of this horror show, and men are threatening him with his life, and he starts shouting, I deny Christ, don't kill me, I'm scared. And also this kid's just lost his father a few years prior. So like, what if you were that kid? What would that do to you? How would that change you? Like, how would that change your goals and your perspectives and like what you think is important? What are the lengths you would go to atone for that moment? How hard would you go? How zealotous might you become? And so like that, it ended up, I don't know. It ended up saying, I took a moment and it just sort of kept spinning it around until it's like, all right, that's who gets it, is the antagonist. And I found some ways to like refract that moment throughout the story to show that like, the protagonist, it kind of affected him a little bit, but he was much younger at the time. He didn't know much about it. And like, his friends kind of hear about it. His church friends hear about it and shrug it off. His school friends hear about it and like pass out in shock. Not really, but almost. So yeah, it ended up being a thing where it's like it became a very useful part of the story in a lot of ways. Even though it moved to, like, most people read a story like this and they expect like the protagonist and me to be one-to-one, which is like at times kind of, but with a lot of big stuff, I moved it to other characters.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, we were saying there that it doesn't feel like a spoiler to kind of mention that it comes up to this like violent confrontation. And I think that's also part of kind of the magic trick of the book, I noticed too, because if you're so steeped in the language of evangelical Christianity, you actually won't see the violence coming. Because you know what I mean? Because every violent, insane thing someone says, it's like, I heard someone say shit like that all the time.
I've thought about that a lot. Yeah. How it's like, this one guy, this antagonist, Eli, Isaac's big brother, is the only person who takes all the shit literally. The only person who actually means all the things he's saying, right? Like, take this nation for Christ. He's not a big political guy, but if he believed that, he would literally try to take this nation for Christ.
Right. Yeah, he's very serious about it. And I mean, I think that was something that, moved me about a lot of this was showing how much like the metaphors that are being used to talk about God or Christianity or how to live a good life in the evangelical world is just like gasoline on mental illness if you already are predisposed to stuff like that. So the protagonist, struggles with a very real suicidal ideation that comes from metaphorical language. And I think that is something that really struck me throughout it is like, there's a degree the book feels like it's a call to like be responsible with the metaphors you're using.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, like the protagonist in particular, it's been interesting. I gave him sort of this like thing that can be read as intrusive thoughts. Like I've never been diagnosed or whatever as a person who experiences extreme intrusive thoughts, but like there's this thing in his head that's just screaming at him, and he thinks it's the Holy Spirit, and then he kind of thinks it's Satan, and then eventually he's just like, well, this is part of my brain that screams at me. But like people who have intrusive thoughts have told me like, yo, this feels real. And at the same time, people who just like, like everyone has a hater in their head, everyone has doubts and like, our brains hate us sometimes. And people who were completely not religious have said like, yeah, I got connected with that immediately, and like a bunch of other perspectives as well, because like, I don't know, ultimately for me, these two brothers are people who take things very literally, right? And like nobody will ever take anything more literally than the antagonist Eli, but Isaac does as well. And there's a moment for me, one of his most relatable moments for me is when he's sort of like in this moment when like part of his brain is pushing him towards self-harm, is he's struggling with like the definition of salvation, which is like, well, duh, that's easy, right?
Yeah.
Is it? It depends on which, it's only easy if the two people who are talking about it went to the same church. Because otherwise, they're coming up with different definitions and different terms, and there is no like single right answer, you know. And like he lists off like 100 different things that the Bible and or various denominations have said are the ways to salvation, and whichever church you went to, it's in that list, right?
Yeah.
So like, therefore, he's right, and also all the others are, and like I remember so many of those moments, you know, of just like I do not feel saved. There's supposed to be an emotional moment. I'm not getting it. I am not doing, you know. So like, and so much of that goes back to, like you say, the language, the metaphors, you know, like the peace that passes understanding. Well, okay, I don't feel it. So, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I have someone who's had chronic depression most of my life. And so I just have no control over my emotional state in a lot of, you know, in that sense. Right. And so that was something that was like one of the most ongoing difficult parts of growing up in that environment was like everybody else seems to be feeling it, but I don't seem to be feeling it. You know, and I think, that combined with then, you know, you mentioned the intrusive thoughts, anxiety. Everybody's got, anxiety and self-loathing a little bit to some extent. But whether you decide that voice in your head is literally God or not, that changes your mental state quite a bit.
Yeah, that can level up your little hater a little bit if you believe it is the Almighty who is very furious with you right now. Yeah, the depression thing, like so like, you know, the process of like religious deconstruction or whatever we want to call it, a term that, you know, kind of didn't exist back when I started. Been at this for a long time, but like the things that fell away, you know, it's like, all right, homophobia fell away quite early. It's just like, I'm not into this. I like that, you know, I have friends are coming out that great. I don't care to think they're bad, you know, and then like sexism falling away and like really all Republican politics falling away without much resistance, honestly. The stuff that really clung, the stuff that got its talons in was like toxic positivity, right? Like that wasn't until the last few years when they just started to realize that like they're you know, like, I mean, now they make Pixar movies about how emotions are okay, you know, but like
that wasn't the case like 10 years ago plus 20 years ago.
But what we had was like, you know, youth pastors saying like, well, why, you know, if you're walking around all bummed out, nobody's going to want to follow you to heaven. You know, like, oh, okay, great, I'm sad, so everyone else is damned. That sucks. You know. But like, the toxic positivity just dug in, you know, so much deeper than so much of the other stuff did.
Yeah, I think that, I think that like, that's where some of the long-term damage that this does, you know, this kind of is how you like relate to your own emotions. And then of course also your own sexuality, which is a big theme in the book as well. I think those are like, cause I think it's a little easier to get out of like, out of the Republican politics stuff because, you know, the Bible has plenty of passages that you could read against, you know, Republican politics just as much as for it. And so that part you can still remain a pretty evangelical person and kind of like, I don't know, try to switch on some of those things. But to get like the association with all of your most negative and self-loathing thoughts with God, and then, you know, also self-loathing for, you know, not being positive enough. Like that's the stuff that's harder to pull out.
Yeah, I mean, the Bible is like really freaking woke at times, so that tends to. I mean, you told us to read it, so we did. So the Republican stuff was pretty easy to get rid of, and it's like voting, you know, conservative politics or whatever. It's just, you know, it's not cool. Like, you know, we could say like, oh, we were so wise and righteous. Well, also at the same time, it's not cool. You know what I mean? So I didn't really want to fight for like, you know, I don't like. There's a moment in the book where it's like one of the characters is like, should I side with like my friend I play Pokemon with or Jerry Falwell? That is not a hard call. You know? And like that's how I
absolutely.
remember it. I'm in a punk band with this guy. That guy's Jerry Falwell. It's not a hard choice.
It's not a hard call. No. I think one thing I really appreciate about the book too is how many how there's kind of like a diversity of ways people react to the evangelical upbringing throughout it as well. Because like I think the stereotype of an evangelical, that somebody who wasn't from this environment wouldn't include someone like Eli being atrocious on so many things, but then kind of opposing war for strange reasons. But like that's the kind of shit you're around with evangelical. It's like somebody will just be like weirdly woke on one thing.
Yes.
The mom who's a rabid Republican, but also like sticks up for, LGBTQ kids.
Yeah. I mean, Eli was a fascinating character because it's like, what if literally all he cares about is fire and brimstone, opposing eternal conscious torment, and on everything he's like, well, war sends people to hell, so war is bad. America has caused war, so America's bad. So he's like this like militant leftist because of hell. And Isaac's mom is like very flexible on a lot of things, and like I tried to make her surprising because like that's real. Like very few people know an ideologically consistent group of people. Like everybody just mostly goes along with whatever their friends are into, and once you get a few weirdos in the group, then you got a big mess. And like the other thing is like with the adults there's that, and even like the pastor who's ultimately like kind of a supervillain is like at points he's shooting down stuff that evangelicals are supposed to believe in. He's kind of winking at the kids like, the rapture's, he doesn't say this, but he's kind of pointing them toward like the rapture's kind of made up, while he's preaching it. But but like the kids, they were also really fun to write, like the teenagers, to write them as head fakes and messing with tropes. And like one of the first characters we meet is like a homeschooler. And I wanted to set it up like, oh, look at this geeky little nerd who had no social cues, but like I think she's the coolest character in the whole book. So I was homeschooled, very similar to actually homeschoolers I grew up around, like much more accurate than the dorky kind of stereotype would have I think done. Like the curiosity, right? Yes. Because like you go to public school and it's like you learn this hour and then this hour and then this hour, and your time is so regimented, and then you're going home. I was homeschooled in middle school, and I remember like weeks where it'd be like, I'm fixated on this thing, that's all I'm reading about, so I read 7 books about it, and like in the book she's like gets super into dinosaurs, and that ends up kind of like I could probably write a version of this story where her getting into Jurassic Park at like age 7 causes everything else that happens in this book. But like I've had people who were like, when I saw a homeschool character, I held my breath, and then I was like, oh, she's a person. Yeah. And I'm like, yes, thank you. I tried really hard to write a person.
All the characters are people. I think what's even funny is like, you have these characters that are very intentionally almost not people, in the sense of like the massive Calebs. Yes. I always think of, but they still become a character even as a collective throughout it. Like, everyone's very human.
Yeah, they start as a chorus and then they sort of coagulate into one guy. And it's very funny that like, I don't know, it's weird. Like you write a book and you have no idea which parts are going to be hangups for people, and like I sent it to a bunch of people. It had an editor and all that, but it was still like, are people going to be good with me just saying like these 6 characters have the same name and the same personality and no one cares to tell them apart? And then gradually over the course of time, 5 of them just kind of fade away, and there's one, the Caleb.
The best Caleb / the worst Caleb.
The one who's constantly either in the boat or on the outs or being punished for something by some minor social faux pas or whatever. But going from 6 guys to 1 guy was no one complained about it. But yeah, ultimately someone made the point that like the girl characters are all like super distinct, like with like some pretty extreme plots on like the social spectrum, whereas most of the dudes are just like, they're a bunch of blockheads, and I'm like, that's kind of how I remember it, right? Like,
that kind of just is how a youth group is. I don't know. Yeah.
It's like, those are the guys who carry folding chairs. And then here are the girls with these numerous talents and these beautiful personalities and deep thoughts.
My brother's name is Caleb, so that
it.
also was incredibly funny while reading it. Just seeing a lot of I mean, and there's a character named Josiah, of course, too. So that was fun to watch.
Is
it's
that
just like
older brother or younger brother?
Younger brother.
Oh, that's perfect then.
Yeah, it's perfect.
That's how we drew it up.
And I liked the Josiah character as well. Not for the obvious reason, but it solid. It's all really good. Okay, one thing, big aspect of the book is Christian music references, of course. Like, that's a huge part of it. Like, a lot of the titles of chapters are named after albums or artists or whatever. I guess what made you kind of decide that was something you wanted to do in the book?
I'm trying to think on like when that started to emerge in the writing process, like that very original, like 20-page version I did. I'm sure there was at least like a page explaining CCM and because like it had to be a thing that like one of these kids is in a band. It's just unavoidable, and like there's going to be a praise band, and there's going to be the praise band's gonna play pick your era. It's either Hillsong or DC Talk or something, something in between.
Yeah.
Like they're going to play some popular music that like the secular reader might not know anything about. And like it emerged, I think, for two basic reasons. One being to quickly signal to people who were there that they are in safe hands when like the very first words you see is a Switchfoot reference, right? And like that, and at the same time, we're going to start with a band everyone knows, and then we're going to work our way to Savior Machine. Actually, no, I cut a Savior Machine reference, but that's too far. But it was that, and it was also like, I wanted to show people who weren't there that like, hey, there's a whole lore here. There's a whole history there. And with like a lot of the world building of like evangelical alternate reality and like various church settings and whatever, I tried to take cues from like fantasy novels where it's like the whole first chapter is nothing but like the history of the this or that. And, like over here are the people who do these things, and over there, ooh, they do those things, and like, I wanted the music references to sort of function as like, if you're reading Tolkien or whatever, and he's like, oh man, down that river, something weird happened. Anyway, let's keep moving. And you don't need to know what happened. Yeah. You just know something weird happened down there. So if I say like, well, these 4 Christian ska bands, it's like, you don't need to know what they sound like. You just need to know there's a whole Christian ska scene. Yeah, of course there is, So like, I wanted those to be like not just winks at people who knew the stuff, because I didn't want just cheap nostalgia. Because like I don't feel nostalgia for like I only feel nostalgia for like a few things in here. Yeah. But like it's not about nostalgia. It's about like an accurate setting, like on for those two reasons. And then I think a third emerged, which was like the blending, the melding, right? Like Switchfoot. That is also a secular band, right? Like there's a scene in there where they're I think it's two boys are in a car debating whether DMX and Switchfoot should go in the Christian side of the CD binder or the secular side of the CD binder, because they are both Christians and they're both played on secular radio, right? So like the blending, like I was watching A Walk to Remember is an okay movie. I don't have a million great things to say about it, but there are far worse Christian movies. But the soundtrack of that movie, right? It's like some Christian band and then Missy Elliott, and I'm like, yes, that is accurate. It's the blending. It's like, yeah, these are church kids and they have to listen to Christian music, and they like a lot of it, and they play some of it sometimes, even though they're kind of trying to play secular music, and they sneak as much secular music as they possibly can, and so do their parents, So like, I didn't want it to be a thing where it's like it's these self-sheltering little fundies who are terrified of everything. They are, but they're terrified of everything, but they're also terrified of missing out on everything, So like, I wanted it to be everything at once. And like, I would love nothing more than for like, a little play button on each page where like you could hear the songs that are going on, or like an actual soundtrack. But yeah, I just wanted with everything to just point at the existence of an alternate reality. The fantasy novel thing you had said earlier, it was kind of funny because I had that exact thought about the book, is that it functions like a fantasy or sci-fi novel where it just gives you enough context clues that if you didn't grow up in it, you can kind of be like, okay, I got it. But
But yeah, like it's also enough that if somebody does know the lore, if you will, it works great. It adds a lot of texture to it.
I was the second chapter, which is it's the most fantasy novel one in that regard, where it's like, on this day, weird evangelicals do these 5 things, and here are very sneaky jokes about them. I at one point actually called that chapter world building, the term that you would use in a sci-fi novel for like.
That's great. No, that's really great. I was thinking of God, there was you kind of referenced the classic thing that usually it was in like Christian bookstores or whatever. They'll like, if you like X band, listen to this band, right? But I think that I like that you went a little step farther though, because I think a lot of people are familiar with those, especially if they knew evangelicals. But I liked, there's a chunk in it. I think it is Isaac who makes the comment that like, well, like that's just for marketing to parents though. Like nobody's actually using it that way. You know, like,
it's the, if you like, Blink-182, listen to Reliant K, you know, blah blah blah. The substitution list. Yeah, when we were kids, we didn't look at that and think, "Wow, that means this band is exactly as good as that other band." No shade to Reliant K. No shade to Reliant K. It means, wow, I could sneak this band past my parents without any trouble. You know, that's what it means, right? It means like I could talk my parents into getting me this for my birthday. You know, like. And it'll probably be good enough. Maybe it won't, but we'll see, you know? And like, yeah, there were some of those bands that we'd go to bat for. Some we wouldn't. Some we'd make fun of. Some we would call ripoffs. Like we had ears, you know, like we weren't just dumb little kids who were like, oh, this is just as good as Rancid. Okay, it must be. No, we knew it wasn't as good as Rancid. We listened to it because it was fine. But yeah, like I with everything in there, I wanted to take it a step beyond the obvious, you know, like there's a girl who in the story at that point, she's been forced to go to church for just a few months, and she makes a "Jesus is my boyfriend" music joke, thinking she's invented that joke. And the narrator's like, yeah, good one. You know, we've been saying that since middle school, you know? And like, we were aware of every single thing that every single, like, you know, non-religious person said about us. Half the time we were saying it ourselves, but we then apologize for it. But, the band substitution thing, there were, you know, there were so many of those bands that like we just legit were like, no, I like this band.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're on the charts, so that makes them seem lame, but oh well, too bad.
Yeah. Well, I think that's something that's kind of tricky with evangelical music is like, a lot of people don't, I think, realize that there was nobody who was forming one of those bands was like thinking, oh, we're going to be the Christian Blink-182 or whatever. Right. They are maybe pulling that influence or whatever, but like they are trying to be genuine artists within a cultural apparatus that they're stuck inside of.
All of them, except Skillet, but all the others.
Right. Yeah, most aren't industry plants, except for Skillet specifically. No, that is true though.
Yeah, I mean, like I when you put it like that, it makes me think like, when we started bands, at no point did we think like, guys, we should become the secular who was big at this Slipknot, you know, like it was or the Christian Slipknot, Demon Hunter. It was like, we like these 10 bands, half of them are Christian. We want to sound like a mix of all this. You know, and that's how every rock band works. I mean, I played in a rock band that was like, we were playing at bars and stuff, but all three, we were Christians in a band. We weren't a Christian band. You know what I mean? Yes.
One of those. But like, none of even if we considered ourselves all really Christian, we weren't like thinking while writing the songs, like, let's write a good ministry opportunity. You know, we were like, I like this 90s rock song and I want to steal the sound of Sex and Candy or whatever. You know, like that was the thought process that was going into it.
Marriage and candy. Yeah. Gotcha.
Marriage and candy. Yeah. Sex after marriage and candy.
Honeymoon and candy.
Honeymoon and candy. There we go. Yeah. And I think though, because of that, Christian music served as kind of a weird space for doubters to kind of flock to, because again, once there was kind of the green light, like, okay, yeah, fine, this music's okay. like, since it's a Christian artist, the Christian artist could get away with often interrogating evangelicalism a lot from this like weird internal, way that like, that's why a lot of these bands have stuck with me as favorite bands oftentimes, is because I think even when they have really awful things to say, they tell on themselves in really interesting ways that it, makes them worth revisiting. I think they lay out an evangelical mindset in a way that it's like, you're able to see how gross it is once you're removed from it a little more.
And when those bands end up with like 2 different discographies and the second one is arguing with the first one.
Yes. I'm a huge David Bazan fan. And that's essentially that.
He let me send him a copy of the book. So
that's awesome. I hope
I was pretty excited about that. I always think about especially in like the alternative music world, mostly the like hard rock offshoots, and like obviously, also like Starflyer and like lots of like just everything but basic rock music, I think. Not really so much in hip hop either, for whatever reason. But like everything at the Zondervan that got shoved into like the other aisle, there's so much room for interrogation there, where like, and I think ultimately what it was is like evangelicalism just like stamped Tooth and Nail Records and everything adjacent to it, right? And what they didn't realize that they were doing, they thought they were empowering a bunch of young rock bands to then form the rock wing of evangelicalism. What they were actually doing is handing a bunch of money to 19-year-olds and telling them that, like, it's fine with us for you to sing about whatever you want. And 19-year-olds turned into, 20-year-olds, and then they just keep going and they keep rethinking things. And, like, they weren't, like, bought like a lot of the CCM artists were, like the big CCM names who were like stamped and validated by like, they're appearing at churches and stuff. It was still like, you're still in the other aisle, and you're like, you're going on tours with secular bands who sound like you, and they kind of accept you, and you're like secular, especially like, pop punk and metalcore. Those are the 2 genres I always think about, where it's like Christians it was kind of a jokey joke for a time, but it was also like not long, where it's like, several of those bands are at Warped Tour, and like at Furnace Fest in Birmingham, we go to every single year. My podcast is playing it this year, by the way. And like we've been going since like 2002 or whatever. And there's sometimes it's like an entire Christian stage, of just like, or Christian and or former Christian, at a completely secular festival, because for whatever reason, these genres just like so avoided preaching at secular listeners, and we're open and honest about stuff. Like I go back to old, Emery or Reliant K or whatever songs, and it's like, there's a lot of shit about like purity culture, and like, oh, I hate myself, I'm so dirty, so bad because I looked at someone, there's all that stuff. But at the same time, that's honest. Like it's right. It's not good, but it's honest, and you don't get that from big label CCM. All you get there is like, Jesus, you love me somehow, but you don't spell out what it is that you think is so bad about yourself, Yeah. And like, I think all that honesty and that youth, that and that like secular immersion just built up to a point where it was like right under evangelicalism's nose that like all of these bands that like I think all the time about how many kids just like followed MXPX out the door, or Zayo out the door, or or Me Without You out the door. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm wearing a Me Without You shirt. Okay, cool. I was gonna say, I actually, the one though I think I actually followed out the door because of where I was at would have been Emory, because they started Bad Christian right when I was like toward the second half of high school. So I got addicted to that podcast and then went through, they're leaving they didn't really leave the faith, but they were opening the door and saying, hey, you can if you'd like. No, I also, I liked your mention, like, it was a bit of a joke in like metalcore or pop punk scenes that these bands were Christian, but it was never really a malicious joke. Cause I was thinking back on like, I remember guys I had met when I was playing in a band who were like, secular folks, who were like, I become a Christian just temporarily while listening to Define the Great Line, That was the joke.
Yeah.
That was the joke, right? And that's not it wasn't like, we hate you because you're Christian. It was...
There are no atheists in foxholes or when Norma Jean really gets cooking. I remember it was like '03. Norma Jean played like a homecoming show in Atlanta. And it was like, this was when they had just, Bless the Martyr had come out. They were like, okay, this is the new band in metalcore, even though they've been around for like 5 years. But like, this is like, they were becoming a big deal within that scene, and this is their homecoming show. I remember this kid, this like kid got a megaphone. He's making like haha Christian band jokes, and like the entire crowd, secular and Christian, was just like, dude, no, this is Norma Jean in Atlanta. We're not doing that. We're not. And it was like, I have never seen like you would never expect that, kid in a black shirt, a bunch of other like skinny rowdy kids in black shirts making an anti-religion joke, and everyone saying, dude, shut up. You would never expect that.
It's Norma Jean. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, that was, I think that was something that really, for me, like, was part of my realization that maybe, like us evangelicals growing up were not persecuted. Was you know what I mean? Like looking at the YouTube comments on like a Chariot video, and everybody's just like, this is cool. And they're not Christians. You know what I mean? Like, and it's like, oh, maybe it's just good music. Maybe.
That's funny. I've never really thought about that. How like, if you grew up as like a like basic CCM fan, you end up with like, oh, the world hates me. My classmates are trying to kill me because they didn't like my Stephen Curtis Chapman album. Whereas I'm like, it's a skill issue. My secular friends like my music fine. I don't know what your problem is. So like the persecution complex, that probably did help eliminate it from my mind. Like I never really thought about it that way.
Yeah. It's, I think, I think for those bands, it played a role too, because, like you mentioned, like them touring with other bands that weren't Christian bands, and like, oh, they're not, killing me for my beliefs. Maybe they're okay.
I think my very favorite thing I've ever read on that subject is Anne Boleyn going on tour with Fall Out Boy. And it's like on Anne Boleyn's wiki page, they're like, and then Fall Out Boy asked us about Jesus. And it's like, you did it. You did the thing. You did the thing every Christian band sets out like to do. This is the dream come true. Somebody actually went like, oh, Jesus. Well, how can I learn more? Hey, they say you're the Christian us. Can you tell us about Christianity? It's like, this is like the good ending of Christian band.
Yeah, that's the like trophy you get. You've finished Christian band officially if you do that. Well, moving away from the music stuff here. One question I think I wanted to ask. I mean, I think it's obvious, but I still want to ask here is universalism is like a big part of this book, and I think it's the big deciding thing. Why is that the issue for you, that like you ended up making so much of the book kind of hinge on that?
Probably a ton of reasons. And like I love talking about this one. This is like one of the things. One of the things I'm always like, I hope someone asks about this. So I'm glad you did. But I think it ultimately came down to like hell as being a non-negotiable for two of our characters, for our protagonist and his older brother, in large part because their father died as a non-religious person, and according to their worldview, might be there. One of them uses this as like fuel for evangelism, which I find understandable, and the other uses this as the other just completely refuses to accept this and bashes his head against anything he can until he starts to realize that, thanks to our beloved homeschooler, that like actually there have been Christians who have thought otherwise. Kind of a lot of them. Kind of some again right under our noses, our guy C.S. Lewis.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Like even if they're not like pure universalists, like a lot of them have like a notion of hell that doesn't quite match up with.
Yeah. Like either it's a temporal hell or it's a hopeful universalism or whatever the case may be. Like, there are lots of things that are like on the periphery. And so like on a personal level, hell was, I certainly took it literally in the sense that like like I was pretty sure I was going because like I didn't have any confirmation that I wasn't, Um, so like it lingered for me for a long time, and even long after I was actually like religiously active in any way, like it was just a few years ago where it still felt naughty to say like I don't believe in hell, like
Yeah,
it
yeah.
still felt like ooh, I hope the wrong guy doesn't hear that, and like I actually had to do like scholarship, amateur scholarship, like actually
Mm.
like read various books on universalism and get to the point where it's like, okay, I remember it was a number of
Mhm.
years ago when I read Rob Bell's book and I was like, oh my God, you're allowed to say this, right? That was my gateway. And I was like, my God, what if this had come out when I was in like 10th grade? Like I cannot
Um,
imagine what a different life I would have,
it would have been around that time, like maybe even earlier for me. And it was Shockwaves. Like it was
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
but
oh
I was
yeah.
too young to actually like read it or side with it. So it's just like, okay, we don't like Bell anymore.
We don't read
I've
that. We don't
gathered.
read that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I when it came out, I saw the internet, hubbub and whatever. And like, I quoted the John Piper tweet in the book,
Yeah, yeah.
on like toward the end. But like, it just meant nothing to me because I didn't care about religion at the time. So I thought, but like finally going back and reading it, and however many years ago, and then moving from there to David Bentley
Hmm.
Hart, to Ilaria
Yep.
Ramelli, to George MacDonald, to a lot of Eastern people, and then finding like, oh my God, Gregory of Nyssa, that's my guy.
Mm.
He's woke on everything,
My
and he,
my
and he
favorite universalist right now has been Bradley Jersak because he does an evangelical case for it, and that's a good one to hand to your.
that is handy. That is apt. But yeah,
Sorry.
well, it felt like as these kids in the book are like breaking down all these taboos, which it's like, again, it's like we could say like, oh, how wise and just of them, or we could just say like, no, that's what teenagers do. So like if
Mhm.
you tell them hell is real, well, okay, well, what you just said, told them is the funnest thing you could possibly do is conclude hell's not real. And like it just a lot of themes just kept emerging, like Isaac, his dad, he's told essentially that like your dad's gone and dead, and either he's in a better place, which means like have any use for you anymore until you get up there, if you do, or
Mhm.
he's in such a bad place that he's completely worthless. And like there's a Thomas Aquinas quote we work in there about like
Yep.
when you're in heaven and you look down at people in hell, you'll think, oh, awesome, this is justice, this is great, I like that that's happening. And so like that sense of there are not a lot of things where I look at Roman Catholicism and I think, that's better, but but one of them is the sense that just because someone has died, we don't have to break communion with them, right? That
Mhm.
is the one thing I will pluck from the Vatican and say, okay, I will hang on to this, and maybe some like sick art of like skulls and whatever. Um,
Right,
so
right.
like that is kind of the takeaway from that entire. Thank you for 1600 years of Catholicism. You have given us that lesson. Um, Whereas evangelicalism, after almost 100 years, you have given us some punk bands. Like, so great, everyone's bringing
So
something to the
yeah.
potluck. But like that sense of no, I defy the idea that I have to give up on things just because I don't exist on the same plane as them right now, as far as I know. That sense
Mhm.
that like, no, we're all still in this together. No, we do not give up on things just because they're taking a break right now, which is what Christians are supposed to believe about death.
Mhm.
And like there's that just kept emerging over and over. That theme of like unburying things, like whether you want them back, whether you want to hang on to the lessons and the memories, whether you should dig them up because they were poisonous and you need to remove them.
Mhm.
That kept emerging. And like none of that makes any sense at all if these things that are gone are either already perfected in heaven or already hopeless in hell. Like either
Mhm.
way, they just don't exist anymore. And that also that the very evangelical sense of like fuck the world, give up on the world, the planet isn't
Yep.
worthwhile at all. We're just here to evacuate. Like that is, of the very short list of evangelical innovations, right? Like
Yeah.
actually, and they didn't even invent the rapture; they just went all in on it. But like that sense of, abandon the planet, twisting it, I guess twisting the whole picture from like there's heaven and there's hell and they're very far away, and then there's earth here and you got to leave it.
Mhm.
Um, twisting that sort of back to like what Jesus said, which is like, no, that's just here. They're just planet. There's this planet is in this cosmos, and let's fix this.
I mean, well, you talk about heaven, and it's heaven is often being said as the kingdom of God come to earth.
Yes. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. How much more simple could he have put it, you know? But like yeah, I mean, the universalism stuff, I guess part of it felt like I wanted to take the reader, you know, a reader who wouldn't be familiar with any universalism. If they came from a background like me, then I want them to find the works of Origen, you know? I want them to find a little Gregory of Nyssa. And so like, oh my gosh, look at this. I've spent 200 pages building up this bookworm nerd who would happen to know that stuff despite being only in 11th grade. How convenient for you that that she happens to be that smart. And also, you know, I wanted to just challenge the assumption that there's only one kind of Christianity, because like, and you see it all the time. Like, you know, if someone says like they get some math formulation about the Trinity wrong, then someone will say like, oh, that's not how it works. And it's according to who? According to whichever guy was in power at the time, they decided whatever's a heresy. You know, like you don't know. Like like it's a metaphor. It's a way of describing the ways we can experience and understand God. You know. And like hell is one of those things. Like everyone just assumes like Dante's hell and Milton's hell is what is in the Bible all throughout. And like everyone assumes there's a verse. Yeah. Everyone assumes there's like a verse where Jesus says, and then after you die, you will go to a throne and God will, if you're not the right denomination, God will point to pitchforks and demons who will stab you. And you will be kept alive for all eternity, even though you will be in maximum pain. And like all the details that we add in, there's nothing about being kept alive in torment. Nothing. There's a lake of fire. You're thrown in it. What happens when you throw something in a lake of fire? It's gone, you know? Or if it's made of something that can be purified, it's purified. Those are the only possible things that can happen in a lake of fire, you know? And like, I don't know. It's I'm rambling, but it's just so many threads kept pointing back to like, okay, we got to do the universalism thing. And like there were three key characters there. In addition to Eli being the antagonist, who's like, my God, if we could just break that guy out of his hell obsession. We have our protagonist Isaac, who's like in his mind fighting for his dad's soul, and doing so in very teen boy ways. Like his atheist friend gets him into playing Diablo 2, and he starts to take it literally. Like at the end of Diablo 2, what do? You kill Diablo, and like, oh God, there was a good guy soul in there all along. And like he kind of fixates on that idea. And he's got his bookworm friend, and she's doing the actual work here. And like they find this this Appalachian woman. She's like a church elder who the book's set in Pennsylvania, so I'm like, okay, Appalachia, that's pretty close. But she was a member of like the primitive Baptist tradition that is like actually hella universalist. Like
the no-hellers.
They were called the no-hellers because they didn't believe in hell, and people like made fun of them. Like it was a derisive nickname, and they're like, oh yeah, cool. We like that. We're the no-hellers. Like they preach it like poverty is hell, injustice is hell, you know?
Yeah.
And like it's like, again, we're talking about things that flip expectations. If I say like Appalachian Baptists and they have some thoughts on hell, you're like, you know, oh God. But then it's like, oh no, they say you should be nice to your neighbor, and that's how you ward off hell, you know? Like the only hell is what we make here on earth. And so yeah, those things work together, and it just sort of built to a moment where it's like this declaration of belief and hope is the only actual heresy you could ever utter, because it means, you know, if I say that no one ends up tormented forever, then what I am saying is that this version of Christianity that I'm being offered is not necessary, you know? Because like, if I'm saying they don't actually have a stick, you know, like they say they have a carrot, but they don't have a stick. So, you know, and at that point, we have to judge them by not what they are saying will happen after we die, but what they are affecting here on earth. And that is not a argument they want. So that's that's some rambling about universalism.
No, that's great. I mean, and I think that's why it was important to focus on hell so much in the book, is because, I mean, hell is the scary motivation that justifies the insane worldview always. And I know for me, as I moved toward universalism, that made me had to completely rethink what the faith even sad, because like once you know, you're not in that how many souls we save is the only moral, you know, calculus there is. Once it's not about that, then you have to actually look at your tradition and ask what it has to say about the state of the poor, or what it has to say about, you know, racial injustice or whatever in your society. And yeah, I think you're right. People, like a lot of conservative evangelicals, I think, harp on heaven and hell so much because there's an uncomfortable conversation that comes out of when you actually focus on the earth for a second and the state of things right now and whether or not they're actually helping.
It's like the number one objection at any time to any form of universalism is like, oh, well, if that's true, what's the point of Christianity? It's like, do you hear yourself? What's the point of like loving the world and loving your neighbor and like, you know, living more abundantly and like all this other stuff, you know, like what's the point of believing that like the universe is biased toward a world in which, you know, we are as carefree as a sparrow? What is the point of wanting that, you know? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think that's what I really loved about the ending, and I'm trying to find a way to say this without spoiling it too much.
Let's go. Let's do it.
Yeah, it's just is that there's a degree that there's almost an evangelical fervor to the end.
Yes,
and it almost, and it, I mean, yeah, it like genuinely brought me to tears because it was like the gospel was being proclaimed, but the gospel is you don't have to be fucking scared of hell anymore.
Yeah,
and to a point, it reaches borderline gesturing toward martyrdom at the end, almost for this belief that God loves everybody. Yeah, and no matter what the evangelical pastor says.
I tried to flip all the things like, you know, young Isaac, we see like he's told martyrdom is cool, dying for what you believe in is cool, dying for quote fingers hope is cool, right? And then like, well, okay, if you tell a kid to die for what he believes in, guess what he's going to do? He's gonna stand up for it so much that you're the ones who gave this kid a backbone, you know. And then like the epilogue. Yeah. I, you know, went back and forth on whether to include it. And then ultimately I decided like, you know, for so much of the book, Isaac's like, I don't have a testimony. There's pressure in evangelicalism to have a testimony, to have a big dramatic story of your conversion. And then I realized at the end, well, like, okay, well, he does. So it's going in there.
Does.
And I also thought about how in evangelical fiction, so often there's the call to action. God's not dead. It ends with like, now text your friends, God's not dead. The Left Behind movie, it ends with tell your friends to see the Left Behind movie. So I'm like, all right, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do a call to action. Like I love that you picked up on that. It was like very much I wanted to end it like this kid is still an evangelical at heart because it does not like not in beliefs and not in politics and you know not in any of that way, but like in tactics. Right.
Yeah. It made me think of it did make me think of David Bazan, as I mentioned earlier. His song "People" on Strange Negotiations has this chunk in it where it's like you know, he's talking about once you have the truth, you want to tell it all the time, and if it gets you into trouble, you don't mind. It's very like evangelical in its language, but like, you know, the more interviews I read from him about that time, I'm pretty damn sure what he was referring to was like pastors who, you know, lost their job because they decided hell wasn't real, or pastors who like stood up for LGBTQ people. You know, and so like I actually really like the kind of reframing of that moral language toward something that's actually good.
Yeah. There's a moment in there where Isaac realizes that like the fervor he feels for telling church kids that they don't have to be scared is the fervor that he was chasing as a younger person when he was trying to tell his school friends that they should be scared, right? Like that when you try to do that, like you should convert to my religion, even evangelism, for me, it was like forced. It was so forced. But
same.
But yeah, right. But like telling people that like we for the book launch event, we did a essentially a secular podcast show at a bar, 500 people at a bar, and we ended it with like I preach the very kernel of the gospel, and like the crowd goes wild, and it's like, yeah, it's good shit.
Yeah, right. And I mean, like, because the evangelical gospel isn't good news; it's like bad news,
right?
And so there's probably a thrill to actually being able to tell good news here.
Yeah.
God loves
and like,
you. That's crazy.
Yeah. And it does feel rebellious, and it feels so contrary that it feels like you're saying something naughty, you're making something up, and it's like just scrubbing all the other stuff off.
Well, you know what? I think probably moving toward wrapping up here. Trying to think if there's anything else I want to ask. Yeah, I don't know. I guess if somebody is going through that process of leaving evangelicalism, I don't know how many people who listen to this would be. I think a lot of them are past that by now. But if they are still going through that, what do you have to say to them? I guess. Yeah.
I think because it's only a few people who are sort of on that progression and aware of it have ever reached out to me about anything, Yeah, because it's always like if they know they're going, then it's kind of easy to say like, okay, Rachel Held Evans, that's next on your reading list, like it's kind of easy to give them the kit, right? But if they're hesitant, if they're resisting, that's when it's a challenge, And I think like it feels like we have an advantage here because we know the lingo, and like with sincerity, we can say like, nobody ever made me like stop believing Jesus. Like nobody ever made me stop thinking Jesus was right about literally everything, and it's hard for someone to say, no, you don't actually believe that, face to face. On the internet, they could say that, sure. But like, you're eating together at a restaurant, no one's going to tell you, no, you actually don't like Jesus. Nobody's going to say that. Like I've had conversations with very conservative people, and they're like, okay, well, agree to disagree, talk tough. And then, and then, you actually sit down and it's like, oh, well, okay, we just disagree on who Jesus is. But like, I mean, that point of kinship is a big one, like, hey, I came from exactly where you came from. Like honestly, 90% of, a doesn't realize they're deconstructing evangelical. If I were to sit down with that person, like I probably came, deeper and more entrenched in it than they were, Yeah. And so like in that way, existence is like is proof that it's not so bad to leap. Like that was the thing we didn't have really in like the 90s, was like being able to say like, okay, so if I decide all this is fake and I just leave, then what? You don't know. Nobody knows, like there was no landing place. But now it is much easier to demonstrate that like, yeah, there's a landing place. And like my friend April Ajoy, who she has a really good podcast. She said something about like, once you decide your theology is just not being an asshole, and then you just see what happens after that, and you realize like, oh, it's not so bad. I think about it all the time, because like ultimately that's a version of what a lot of us did, was just like, okay, I think I'm just gonna like see what the universe looks like if I don't think God is a bigot. And then it's like, oh, now I see all these Bible verses differently, and now I read them totally differently, So I guess, I mean, just generally like just talking I think it's really helpful. It's like contorting the tools of evangelicalism, not really contorting, more like purifying, liberating, to just say like, yeah, your life is your testimony,
Yeah.
Like let the joy shine through, like all that stuff. It works both ways.
Oh yeah. That's great. Was there anything you want to plug aside from, of course, the book before we wrap up here?
The audiobook version is coming. We have paperback, hardcover, ebooks are out right now. Audiobooks we are working on right now, hopefully out within the next few months. We did sort of a piece by piece process on that rollout, but yeah.
Hell yeah. Well, I'm excited. I'll probably end up listening to it. Yeah. Be a fun way to reread it. I'll be interested to see how you'll do some of it as like in an audio form.
Yeah. There's lots of theater at times.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Jason. This has been great.
Thank you, Josiah. Thank you for having me. This is very fun.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you like what you heard, make sure to leave a review on Apple Podcast. It helps out with the algorithm. And check out the back catalog if you haven't already. If you really like the show, consider supporting it on Patreon for a mere $3 a month. One of the bonuses you get if you support the show on Patreon is you get your name read out at the end of every episode. And hey, speaking of that, this episode is brought to you by our lovely patrons, who include, I am once again Philip Cozy, Gavin Aronson, Joseph Gross, Kyle Gannis, Moss, Regular Sized Horse (small), Robert Heilman, Stephen aka Spike Stonehand, The Blurst of Times, The Worst of All Possible Worlds, and of course, Chris Barker. Thank you so much for everybody who supports this show, and I will see you soon with more episodes.